Over the last couple of weeks, we've been looking at the life of Moses, and we're going to continue with Exodus chapter 7. And last week, we had looked at that sometimes, regardless of the burning bush experience that we've had, sometimes you and I are reluctant to really listen to God. Is that true? Sometimes we say, God, are you really wanting me to do that? And we're kind of very reluctant on what God has asked us to do. Moses and Aaron have been given permission to be spokespeople for God. Actually, it says that Pharaoh would look at you as God. And some Bibles will have the smaller case and some will have the uppercase. But regardless of that, we're going to go back to Exodus chapter 6, verses 28, and we're going to pick up right there, and then we're going to go into 7, 8, and 9. Now when the Lord spoke to Moses in Egypt, he said to him, I am the Lord. Tell Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, everything I tell you. And in verse 30 it says, But Moses said to the Lord, Since I speak with flattering lips, why would Pharaoh listen to me? Then the Lord said to Moses, See, I have made you like God to Pharaoh. In other words, he's saying, Pharaoh is going to be looking at you, and when he sees you, he's going to see the very presence of who I am. Remember, I told you that I am sent you. And Pharaoh is going to see you because of the authority of God in your life, and he will recognize at some point that God does exist. Wow. So when we take a look at it like that, Pharaoh is going to be recognizing Moses, the spokesperson for God in human form, as to be God. Not that Moses was God, I want to clarify that. But it's saying that Pharaoh and everything that he's doing because of what he's going to go through has to recognize that there is an authority figure and his name is God, and God is in control of the universe. Would you guys agree with me today that God is still in control of what we face today in our life? So we go on and it continues on. And it says, Aaron will be your prophet. You are saying everything that I command you to do, and your brother Aaron is to tell Pharaoh. So here you have Moses and here you have Aaron, and they're getting ready to go to meet with Pharaoh. Wow. And then if you continue on down and let's just kind of jump down to verse 6. Remember I told you that Moses was 80 years of age when he came to this point in his life. And it says, Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord commanded him. Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron was 83 when they spoke to Pharaoh. And in the King James, it says, Moses was 80. A score is 20 years. You guys remember Abraham Lincoln 7 years ago. 87 years ago is what Abraham Lincoln was saying. But it's saying 80. So Moses was 80, and Aaron was 83 years of age. Wow. How would you guys like to begin a new career at 80 years of age? How many of us at 80 years of age are thinking, man, I am glad that I am retired. I'm not 80 yet, but I'm so glad that I am retired from one job and I get to do what I really love to do. But at 80 years of age, I can't even imagine beginning a new career and saying, God, are you sure that you called me? So they go to meet with Pharaoh. And Pharaoh at this point is kind of really a politician. He talks good, he sounds good, but you never really know what's in Pharaoh's heart. And God is saying, I'm going to break it down so that you will actually see what's inside of Pharaoh's heart. Wow. And in verse 8 of chapter 7, Then the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, When Pharaoh says to you, Perform a miracle, then say to Aaron, Take your staff and throw it on the ground before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake. Some translations will say serpent. And serpent, I found out in the Hebrew, in this sense, actually means as a dragon. A dragon? Wow. And I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I'm just saying in the Hebrew, it's mentioned that it would be as a dragon. And if you take a look at that, remember I told you that they worshiped everything under the sun. And all the animals and everything else that the Egyptians worshiped were in the form of an animal. And so, many scholars and theologians, I don't know if I agree with them because I haven't done enough research and I don't understand Hebrew enough to be correct on it. But if these scholars and theologians are correct in what they're saying when Aaron threw down his staff, it actually became a crocodile, because the crocodile was also referred to as a serpent. And I started thinking about that, and I know that the Egyptians worshiped the crocodile. They would have all these cool gods that they would worship that absolutely meant nothing to them. To worship a crocodile. Why? You know, it's my first question. Why would you want to worship a crocodile? Why would you want to worship a snake? Why would you want to worship anything other than the true God? But here you have Pharaoh, and he comes by and he says, okay, he says, that's a pretty cool trick. So he calls all of his magicians and sorcerers, and they're able to duplicate that very feat. However, here's where God is God. Because as Aaron threw it down, and they were able to duplicate it, and Pharaoh saying, really, show me who your God is and what your God is made of. I want to check out the credentials of your God, and I want to see what kind of battle I'm facing. Throw it down and it becomes a serpent or a snake. And if it became a crocodile, that's cool too. I'm not going to argue with that. And the magicians and the sorcerers, through their black magic and through witchcraft and through the power that Satan has. Yes, Satan has power, and it's not for you and I to mess with the devil. I want you to know that. But God is greater than anything else that we will ever face in our life. And so they duplicated. And then all of a sudden, Aaron's staff that he had thrown down gobbles up the serpents or the crocodiles, whatever it is, and they could not duplicate that portion of what God was doing. Wow. See, here's the truth about it. God is going to remove the humanity out of you and I to prove that He is God to people that don't know who He is. So that you and I get absolutely no credit in it. And here they worship this crocodile. And I could just, if it was a crocodile, if it was a snake, either way, I would like to kind of been there. I don't like snakes, as you guys know. I do not care for snakes. Not one bit. Rob, I know that you go out and you look for those things, but not me, man. A snake is good enough, dead for me. And yes, Rob, I've seen pictures of you holding rattlesnakes, but not me. I'm going to scream like a little girl because I don't care for snakes. And I'm going to do what everyone else would do, except for Rob, and I'm going to run the opposite direction. But here's where I would like to have been there and to see what God was doing. I would like to have seen Aaron throw down his staff and it become a snake. And then the magicians and sorcerers, then they're able to duplicate it. And then Aaron says, oh, wait a minute, God's not through yet. Gobble, gobble, gobble. You guys that have grandkids, baby shark, baby shark. I could kind of see that in my mind, and I could see what's going on, and I could see the snake or the crocodile chewing up the rest of them, and I could sit back and I could see Moses and Aaron saying, that is my God that I serve. It doesn't say that in the Bible, but you have to remember, I told you I have a warped sense of imagination. And see, the truth is that the devil tries to duplicate everything that God does today in the world. The the devil is out to try to duplicate it, but he cannot, because God is the ultimate authority. Would you guys agree with me on that? There is no duplication to the power of God, period. God is God, bar none, and there is none other. And so, here, Pharaoh's heart, he comes in and he says, oh, that's a pretty cool trick. Ah, that is a pretty cool trick. And Moses and Aaron, they said, because you asked for a miracle, you asked us to show us who we are, here is who we are. But because you have failed to listen, I want you to know that this is what's going to happen to you. So they go back and we continue to read on. And in verse 14 it says, Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is unyielding. He refuses to let my people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he goes into the river, the Nile River. Remember, we talked about that's where Moses was drawn from. And Moses literally means to be drawn out of. And we talked about the crocodiles that could have been there, and the letter of the law that Moses' mom actually followed to a T, placing Moses in the river, throwing Moses in the river, but she had put him in a basket. Go to Pharaoh in the morning while he's down at the Nile River. The Nile River represented life to the Egyptians. Wow. And here all of a sudden he goes down and Moses says, let my people go. Pharaoh looks at him and says, dude, who are you? Remember, I'm that guy that came by the other day and mine's my brother's staff. We threw it down and it gobbled up your sorcerers, snakes, or crocodiles, whatever you want to call it. I am Moses, and God is the God that I serve, and I want you to know that God says, let my people go. Moses says, if you choose not to let my people go, he says, this very river is going to become blood. He says, not only this river, but all the rivers are going to become blood. Aaron stretches out his staff, and the river becomes blood. And the magicians were able to duplicate it to a certain extent, but they could not undo what God had done. And Pharaoh, it says that Pharaoh, after 7 days, can you imagine the stench that was coming from that? The waters, man, if everything is turned to blood, we have running water. Randy, imagine, getting calls in the middle of the night. Hey, Randy, I turned on my faucet and it's blood. Whoa, hey, that's pretty interesting. And then you get another phone call at midnight. Hey, Randy, I don't know what's going on, but all of Pixley, every time you turn on the faucet, is pouring out blood. How many of you guys would be excited about that? I know Randy's not. If you guys are excited about that, Randy's trying to find out what the problem is. He's trying to provide us with good drinking water. He's trying to do all those things. And all of a sudden, it goes on for 7 days. And I find that interesting. 7 is God's perfect number. And we go back, and Pharaoh says, man, he says, you have to remove this curse that your God has put upon my people. Please pray to your God that this would be a deliverance. Moses said, in the morning, I will pray, and God will remove them. And Pharaoh says, well, okay, you can do what you want to do. And it says that Pharaoh hardened his heart. Pharaoh hardened his own heart towards God. The Nile River that once represented life now is representing destruction, death, and decay. And Moses goes in after 7 days. And see, we can pick that back up at verse 22. But the Egyptian magicians did the same thing. by their secret arts. And Pharaoh's heart became hard. He would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. Instead, he turned and went into his palace. And then we skip down to verse 24. The Egyptians dug along the Nile to get drinking water because they could not drink the water of the rivers or the lakes or anywhere else. 7 days passed after the Lord struck the Nile. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh and say, 'This is what the Lord says. Let my people go.'" So he goes back in and he says, "You have to let God's people go. I'm one of God's people, and God wants you to let them go." Pharaoh says, "Well, not a chance." And then you have the next plague that comes by. And you have the plague of frogs. Did you know that the Egyptians actually worshipped the frog and they thought it was a fertility god? And the god that they had by that name was Heka. How would you like to worship a god by the name of Heka? H-E-K-A, Heka. A goddess of rebirth and fertility. And it says that there were so many frogs and the frogs were just swarming everywhere. And everything in that land was being run over by frogs. And because of their fear and because they thought the frog was a goddess of fertility, they were too afraid to kill him. But the frogs were so deep that they were coming everywhere. Randy, let's go back to you. You got the blood cleared up, for the city. Thank you. Now, all of a sudden, the same thing. You have frogs coming out of your drain pipes and everywhere else. And you'd open up your oven door, and there would be nothing but frogs in there. Wow, I don't know about you, but I think I might change my God at that point. And Pharaoh, again, in chapter 8, and in verse 4, the frogs will come up, and you and your people and all your officials. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, stretch out your hand over the staff in the streams, and the canals, and the ponds, and make the frogs come to the land of Egypt." But the magicians, the sorcerers, were able to duplicate it. But they could not remove what God had done. So all these frogs are running everywhere. And it says Pharaoh hardened his heart. He says, you've got to do something about these frogs here, man. He says, you're kind of really annoying me. Can you remove these frogs? Moses says, as you wish, in the morning I will pray, and the frogs will be removed. Pharaoh says, okay, that's cool. And then we go on to the next one. And in verse 16 of chapter 8, then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the ground, and throughout the land of Egypt the dust will become gnats, or we could say lice." And everywhere you go, imagine, remember we had all the frogs, and if they were lice, the lice are helping to destroy the decay that was there by eating the frogs that people had piled up and swept out after God had removed them. Man. And then all of a sudden, the ground becomes unbearable. And the ground is moving underneath you, and it's either gnats or lice. Now, when I was in the Navy, we had chili beans one day for dinner, and the chili beans were good. They started running away from me. And the rice, every once in a while, would run away from you because it wasn't really rice. You guys kind of get the picture of what I'm talking about. Imagine these everywhere. And it says the Egyptian sorcerers and those guys were able to duplicate it, but they could not remove it. And then we come on into the next one. the plague of the flies. And as we take a look at the plague of the flies, see, you have the gnats, and actually what the Egyptians told Pharaoh is they said, we cannot duplicate this. This has to be the finger of God. Let better people go. And Pharaoh says, no, hey, come on, guys, you gotta chill out, man. You're starting to upset me. You're really starting to annoy me with all these curses that you're bringing down, and you want me to give up the gods that I serve and follow your God and let your people go. And all of a sudden we have the next one, the flies. Now here's where it really gets cool. It says the people, the Israelites that were living in Goshen, when the flies came, they were not affected by the flies. So God is making a separation between the Jewish and the Egyptian. Then the Lord said to Moses, get up early in the morning and confront Pharaoh. As he goes to the river, say to him, this is what the Lord says, let my people go that they may worship me. If you don't let my people go, I will send a swarm of flies on you and your officials and your people and your houses. The house of the Egyptians will be full of flies. Even the ground will be covered with them. But on that day, I will deal differently with the land of Goshen where my people live. No swarm of flies will be there, so that you will know that I am God, who I said I was. I started making the distinction. And what God's really destroying is God is destroying the false images of these gods that the Egyptians worship. Yes, they even worship the fly. Why would you worship a fly? If you guys are like I am, a fly swatter works really good. Fly traps work really good. But imagine you're living in this land and all of a sudden it's swarming with these flies, and some of those flies you think are a god. And in verse 25, it says, then Pharaoh summoned Moses, and Aaron said, go and sacrifice to your God. He says, but I want you to know you can go, but you know what? You can't go very far. And here's where you and I come into that. Sometimes you and I compromise with God and say, God, what if I just went over here and I kind of halfway obeyed you? God, I can come over here and I'm not at the edge yet. God, I'm going to compromise just a little bit, and I'm just going to try to listen to you, but I'm going to compromise with what you do. And that's exactly what Pharaoh was doing to God. He says, God, he says, I will let your people go, but don't go too far, because I still want to keep the hand upon you. So these flies, they're everywhere. Let my people go. And in verse 28 is where you would find that compromise coming in. Do we ever compromise God? Well, God, it's okay if I date her. You know, she's pretty hot. But, you know, does she go to church? Well, God, she used to go to church. And see, we start to compromise. And we can put that in anything. And the only reason why I can say that is my wife's here, and, you know, I can say, I think she's pretty hot. And, you know, so we look at that and we can start to compromise and say, but God, you know, well, she goes to, you know, that church. Okay. And in high school, there was a girl by the name of Charlene that I kind of liked. And it would have been really easy to kind of compromise even going out with her. She was a Mormon. And she says, Dave, will you ever consider being a Mormon? I said, no. And that was about the end of my relationship, because I didn't want to compromise the Word of God. She was nice looking. She was strange. But she was, you know, nice looker. And sometimes you and I get to that point in our life that it's okay because we compromise compromise on what God has told us not to do, or compromise on what God has told us to do. You say, Dave, where do you come up with all these things? Because it says it right here in verse 28. Pharaoh said, I will let you go. Offer your sacrifice to the Lord your God in the wilderness, but do not go very far. In other words, I'm still going to keep control of what you're doing. And then we come to the livestock. Oh, let's go back to the wonderful Egyptians that worship the fly, the crocodile, the frogs. And they worship the livestock. They worship the bull. They worship the camel. They worship the horse. And God says, Moses, I want you to go. And this is now in chapter 9. I want you to go. And I want you to tell Pharaoh that if he doesn't let the people go, the livestock is going to die. And see, now it's starting to get personal. Now it's starting to come into a personal thing. The livestock. Well, God, you've already destroyed this. You've already destroyed that. And what God is doing, He's breaking down the small lowercase g's in the Egyptian empire. That there's only one God that will be served. And that is Him. So let's go to chapter 9 and verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, this is what the Lord, the God of the Hebrews says, let my people go that they may worship. And if you refuse to let them go, if you refuse to let them go, I want you to know this is what's going to happen. And then you continue to read, and down there towards the end of that subsection it says, and God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And the first few times Pharaoh had hardened his own heart toward God. Man, do we ever come to a point in our life that maybe we've hardened our heart towards God? I had a guy that called me the other day, and he says, I want you to know that I denounced Jesus. He says, God isn't doing anything for me. He doesn't bring me a Big Mac anymore. And so I denounced Jesus. I think that he's at that point in his life. Keep him in prayer. You guys know who I'm talking about. He's that guy from back on the East Coast. And then he wants me to help him after cussing me out. He's hardening his own heart. And God is allowing it to happen because he doesn't want to turn back to God. But it says, and God hardened the heart of Pharaoh. God hardened the heart of Pharaoh. And see, here's what happens. All the lowercase gods that the Egyptians had, they were being destroyed. But did you know that you and I have lowercase gods in our life? Money, TV. I'm not saying money's bad. I'm not saying TV's bad. Cars, society, homes, ski boats. We lived in Lemoore. This guy lived down the street from us. And he had 3 ski boats and 5 brand new cars. And I'm thinking, Lord, he doesn't even go to church. God, why does he have that? Because his gods were those items. He worked for corrections. And he would take every overtime that they ever had. And when Department of Corrections started getting rid of the overtime and not letting them work, you would see him selling his items off because those had become his gods. But see, you and I, we could put gods in any area that we want to. In other words, you and I, yes, we may not worship the crocodile, we may not worship the fly, we may not worship those things. But if we allow small lowercase g's to take the place of who God is in our life. And God says, I will remove them. Anything that you do over me, He says, I'm going to destroy it. And then we come into where it really gets cool. 9 and verse 8. And we come into that part of it. And Pharaoh, God has hardened Pharaoh's heart at this point. Pharaoh, you better turn to God. God's still trying to deal with you. But Pharaoh, if you choose not to do this, this is what's going to happen. God's going to bring boils on human and animals, the cattle that are left. And now, just for a moment, imagine that you're there and you're watching Moses. You're an Israelite because you're not going to be affected by the boils. God's separating what's going on. And it says that they took the ash and just kind of threw it in the air, and instantly boils appeared. That means Pharaoh was one of the first to get the boils. And he still refused to listen to God. And see, we could go on and we could read that. To Moses and Aaron, take a handful of soot from the furnace and have Moses toss it into the air in the presence of Pharaoh, and it will become fine dust over the whole land of Egypt. And festering boils will break out on people and animals throughout the land, except the land of Goshen. So they took the soot from the furnace and stood before Pharaoh. Moses tossed it in the air, and festering boils broke out on all the people and animals. The magicians could not stand before Moses. And see, God is separating. God is bringing back in. He's saying, I'm not going to put up with these false gods that you have. I alone am the one that needs to be worshipped. And I started thinking about that the Egyptians, the magicians, could not stand before Moses. Why? Because he represented God. And Pharaoh, no, I'm not going to let him go. Wow. The boils. And you skip down to verse 12, and it says, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said to Moses. There's probably times in my life that I've not listened to God the proper way. There's been times in my life that I've tried to compromise with God. And God says, let those things go and worship me and me alone. Next week we're going to be finishing up the pledge, and we're going to be taking communion. The plague of hail, the plague of the locusts, the plague of darkness, and the plague of the firstborn child, which leads into communion. Have you ever thought that sometimes maybe you and I have gone too far in compromising and walking too close to the edge? Accepting things in our life. This morning in Sunday school, Neil requested prayer for our nation. Our nation needs it. Our nation as a whole has made a whole bunch of small, lowercase g's, gods in our nation. And God says it's time to turn back to Him, to the one and true God. If you guys would stand with me this morning, these altars are always open. Perhaps you just want to talk to the Lord. Perhaps different things are going on in your life. Perhaps at times you and I have compromised where we really stand with God. It's time to turn back and not have our hearts hardened. Father, I thank you, Lord, for who you are. Lord, as we've looked at the burning bush experience and we could be walking on holy ground, Lord, at times we feel reluctant to follow you. God, you're giving us signs in our world today to turn back to you, and our nation is ignoring it. God, I ask that you would bring forgiveness to our nation, bring forgiveness to our communities. Lord, help us to turn back to you. Lord, I thank you for who you are. Lord, I ask that you just be with us. And Lord, help us to take Jesus out into our communities. And Father, we just give you praise. We would ask that you just continue to watch over us and protect us. In your Son's name, amen.